not, somebody motion to move to executive
I make a
session?
motion that we move into executive session subject to MSRA section 405 6A.
We have a personnel issue.
Personnel.
I'll second that.
Second. All in favor? Okay.
Go off that door.
Are we close? Yeah. Motion for another, thank you, executive session.
Yeah, I make a motion we go into executive session regarding negotiations of potential land transaction in accordance with MSRA section 405 6C.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
All right, you're recording.
Okay, we are out of executive session. All right, next, approve the minutes of our meeting last month. Anybody have any issue with the meetings?
Make a motion to approve the minutes of January 7th, 19th.
Second. All right, does anybody have any issue with the minutes? Anybody have any additions? Okay, all in favor? Okay, good. Financial update, Tanya.
All right, gallons sold are down about 4% from January of last year. Payroll and benefits are driving expenses up. Payroll is due to overtime on main breaks, and benefits, we received a double bill for health insurance, which, you know, a portion of that would have been paid in December. January, we ended with just under $2 million cash on hand. And the general resolution bond application was submitted last week, and we should hear from the bond bank on March 16th, which is the day of our next meeting, so we might know at the next meeting if it was accepted or not.
Now receivables?
They're holding pretty steady, not a whole lot of change.
There's a, if you look further up off on the agenda, there is a item under new business for bonding of pipe replacement. I don't know if we just want to kind of address that now. As Tanya mentioned, you know, that bond resolution has been, well, it's been submitted to the bond bank, so the application is in. We're working with bond counsel. There was a, because at the last meeting, you know, it was not advertised, it was brought up during the meeting to pursue a bond, and that's fine. It was voted in, and we pursued it. Now, backing up a little bit, in order to do this properly in terms of the bond process, our bond counsel informed us that you really need to have an advertisement, a public advertisement in place 7 days prior to a vote to take out a bond. It's not going to be a problem, but logistically we do have to advertise that we are going to be taking out a bond. It has to be 7 days before a vote, and that has to be by newspaper or normal means. So the only way to do it is to advertise sometime this month in the Sun Journal that we are going to be taking out a $2 million bond, and then at the next meeting in March there will have to be another formal vote taken to take out this bond, and that will suffice for the public notification. So, I mean, it's a procedural thing, and it's not going to hold up the application, but just wanted to give you a heads up on that.
Great. Okay. Is that it, Tanya?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, payment of bills.
I move, thank you. I move that we ratify the payment of bills. Had a few questions, and Tanya and Mike took care of them.
Great.
I'll
Is that
second,
Casey seconds?
I'll second that.
Okay, any other discussion? All in favor? Okay. Excellent. Open session. Okay, nobody's here. Closed session. And Mr. Broadbent, activity project update.
All right, so your activity report, as you can see under mains, we did have a number of main breaks in January, and that trend did continue into the beginning of February. We monitor temperatures in the wintertime very closely. We have what we watch called degree days. It's basically the number of hours that the temperature spends below freezing. It's there's a way to monitor that temperature and determine the level of frost you have in the ground. We did activate the Group 1 bleeders at the beginning of January, and then after 2 weeks of extremely cold weather, we implemented the second group of bleeders in our system. And what that does is just any area that we know has been vulnerable to freezing in the past, they run their water to try to keep their pipes from freezing. We also advise them that, hey, look, you know, if we ask you to do this and you don't do it and it freezes, it could be on you to get this thawed and running again. As far as the frost depth goes on some of these breaks, just last week when we dug a leak, we were down to about 5 feet. So the frost is still growing. We're not quite out of the woods yet. Again, we've had some cold temperatures. We've got some warm days coming up that mix in. When you have those rare warm days in the middle and then you get some rain, it actually drives the frost down deeper. That's where it kind of got us a few weeks back. We had that real warm up and some rain, and frost is pretty deep. That's 5 feet, a considerable amount. You really have to worry about services and that type of stuff freezing, particularly in driveways and whatnot. So the crew has done a phenomenal job. They have kept up with all of this. They've put up with some pretty unbearable situations. I know Sid keeps you updated on the emails, but it's been a busy month with that.
Right, Railroad Street, Heritage Court, the break that was in the street there, that new pavement, it needs a little more cold patch until springtime when it gets done with the regular.
Okay. Yep.
That gets sees a lot of traffic.
A lot of traffic.
I've got a couple of questions too. There was a couple of breaks that were on the owners too, wasn't there?
There have been some, yep.
One of them.
And I don't qualify those as, there's been some on services. So there's the service box is where we shut off a property. It's usually that service box located on the property line. If it leaks between the service box and the street, that's on us. If it leaks on the other side of the service box, that's on the owner. Any leak that we fix is on our side of the box. So if we fixed it, it was on us, whether it was on a service or not. The leak on Railroad was actually on the service to the bank, but the gate valve to the bank, for whatever reason on that one, was put way back on their property. But if we can't shut it off without killing the water in the street, then it's ours. I mean, we can't isolate it. If I was able to close their valve and stop the leak, we'd have notified them and they'd had to get somebody in there to fix it. So we did have to take care of that. But yeah, some have been on services. There's been some freeze ups, so we've had a number of them this week. People are calling with no water, and usually when I know in the morning they're calling with no water, I know what's going on. It's frozen. So knock on wood, it's been okay, but we're getting calls. There's a lot of frost in the ground.
So we usually charge them if we have to do any work, like that one at the bank. We end up doing that.
Well, that's on us because we can't shut it off. So we fixed it. That's us. I mean, we should dig up and install a gate valve at the main, and if we can't isolate it over there. But so yeah, no, that's.
We do have provisions in our service standards that if we go thaw out a service, depending on when we show up, we don't know where the freeze is.
Yeah.
But once we start working on it, we figure it out, and there are provisions that we can bill customers if it's found to be on their side of the service. So that's something we can do if we, and especially if it's something that we keep going back for. That's
Sure. Yeah.
that's.
Well, I appreciate the descriptions and the emails. I would really like pictures whenever we can get them. I really think that helps me understand what we're dealing with, especially with older pipe. So pictures are really beneficial, but the narrative is really good, the information with the great one. Appreciate that.
And they've had some at night too, so that may be difficult getting pictures at night.
Well, if somebody could remember to take out their phone and go click. That's all.
I'll continue to ask, and I get as many as I can.
I understand. I appreciate it.
Outside of that, there's nothing super noteworthy in the activity report. Got a few hydrants. There's not a lot of the project work going on. Snow removal. Just some standard stuff, unless anybody had questions on the activity report. If not, I'll roll back into project stuff. So I talked about the frost and the bleeders. The other thing on the project update we wanted to talk about is EPA has revised the lead and copper rule. There's 5 big things that are going to affect us, and we wanted to bring this up as an FYI. We have till October 16th, 2024 to comply with this. So they have, in the new rule changes, they have enacted different things. One of them is to use science-based testing to find more sources of lead in drinking water. So one of the things they've done is they're changing the way sampling is conducted. Again, lead and copper sampling is the only sampling that you do. We go right in and sample right from people's fixtures. Depending on the type of fixture, they could get high lead readings. So they're going to be changing the sampling techniques to try to find where this lead is to break from the previous testing methods. They're changing the trigger levels to jumpstart the replacement of fixtures. So again, they're lowering the standards, whereas proposed before something was a higher level, but it didn't meet the threshold, so you didn't worry about it. They're lowering that now to say, well, this is a problem, you need to address it. So that's changing. They're going to be driving and pushing to replace known lead service lines. Fortunately for us, we have no known lead service lines. Lead service lines is not something that was typically installed in the Northeast. We're lucky that we don't have those in the Midwest. That's not the case. They have lead lined and lead service lines. That's very common. There's some cities that have hundreds of thousands of them still. So we're lucky that doesn't impact us as much. But one thing that will impact us is they're considering galvanized lines that were connected to a lead gooseneck at one time or another. Even if we removed that lead gooseneck years ago, they're considering that galvanized line as a lead service. So this will impact us. Right now, up until 2024, we're only required to notify them of these. It's very likely after that there's going to be deadlines to remove those, irregardless if they're on our side of the service or not. We will be required to replace the whole run. Again, just want to keep you guys in the loop on this.
Will be funding available for that?
There'll be funding available. Couple more bullets here. School and child care facility testing has been mandated. Prior to just a short time ago, it wasn't mandated. It was only recommended or encouraged. We're fortunate. Auburn, through our water quality lab at the lake, was able to conduct a bunch of sampling of the schools in Auburn actually about 2 years ago. And a lot of the issues were addressed then. I don't know if you've noticed in the papers, there's been a lot of talk lately about lead levels in the schools in Lewiston. They had not done the testing at that time, so they're now kind of in the limelight because this rule has changed now. But that's what's going on. It's not something, and this testing is not something that's being conducted through the Lewiston Water Division or even through the city of Lewiston. It's the drinking water program in Augusta going directly into the schools mandating the testing. So this is strictly between the schools and the state. It doesn't have any implication on the water system. The last one would be, as I touched on with the galvanized line, we will be required to identify and make public the location of all of our service lines. And this would be the makeup of them. So are they copper, are they brass, are they lead, are they galvanized, what are they? This is going to be a pretty big effort that we may need to get some assistance to get this done by 2024. While we have very good records of our service lines, a lot of those records only go up to the service box where our ownership is. We are going to be required to provide records all the way to the house. So that might be home inspections, that might be excavation work. There is going to be a tremendous amount of funding going around. I know the state's going to be getting somewhere around $25 million a year for the next 5 years to fund just this. So I did go to a meeting last week up in Augusta and on this rule change and sat down with the executive director of the drinking water program, and they gave a presentation on this. So again, we're going to be watching this closely. As soon as we get the exact language of what we're going to be required to do, we're going to have to, again, 2024 is going to be here fast. We may have to get some applications in by the end of this year to secure some funding to get this done. But again, there's just an FYI on that right now. There's going to be more to come. As soon as we know more, we'll bring it forward. Last thing I had for you, in our equipment budget, we had budgeted $32,000 to buy a new trench compactor. This is a fairly large 6-ton compactor. It's actually remote controlled. We rented one last summer. We paid about $13,000 in rental fees, which we charged those rental fees off to the project. We wanted to purchase one for this year. We got a quote this fall, put it into our budget. Well, lo and behold, come January 1, the price of these compactors went up $6,000. And not only that, if you didn't order it by December of last year, you're not getting it until 2023. So basically, we can't buy a new one. However, they do have one that is in very good condition, that has been used and has been in the rental fleet, that we can get a 1-year warranty on for $23,370. We would like to purchase that. It's in really good shape. We've checked it out. We spoke with the contractor who used it last summer. They were very happy with it. We're going to get a 1-year full warranty as part of this. And again, if we don't get it, we'll pay another $13,000, $14,000 in rental fee. I think this will more than pay for itself in a couple of years and be a good asset for us.
We're budgeted for that?
We are budgeted. It's in our equipment budget under compactor. One thing that's not in the budget, but what we would like to do and purchase under the budgeted amount for the compactor is to buy a storage container. We've rented these in the past. We rented a pod unit once. We've been talking about doing this for a while. We didn't put it in the budget because we were thinking about purchasing it and just charging it to the projects, kind of like a rent-to-own thing like we do with other equipment, is to buy a 20-foot storage container. What we'd like to put in there is all the parts that, like when we're doing a street, if we're doing Rose Street, that box will be set aside with the parts for it, something we can lock up at night. We don't have to worry about it. The next day we don't have to transport parts back and forth. We'd like to have that as a secure storage box to keep our parts in while we're doing main projects. It's also something good. We can have deliveries drop ship right to it, so you don't mix it with your other inventory. Keeps it cleaner and simple when you keep the two separate. So we did cost around. In your packets there's a quote for one from United Rental. Actually, right after we got the agenda packets out, I did get a better price locally right here on Center Street. The Black Bear storage, we got one for $4,900 delivered for the same box. So
Is it something you move as you or?
yeah, you move around, or you find a spot where you like it that's centralized. You could leave it there. You could, it's something we can move around. So I don't know if you guys want to see this one from Black Bear. We can pass one around, but we'd like to just get the board's approval. Again, it's already been voted on, the money and set aside, not necessarily for the container. But
Is this a motion or just a consensus?
it's more of a, I don't know, what do you think on the storage container, Sid?
Well, the storage container was not itemized or budgeted. We were, as Mike said, we were hoping the savings realized from not only the compactor, but other things have also come in under budget. We're just going to make sure we're not over our equipment total expenditure by year end. We're not planning on bringing a whole bunch of other things. You never know, but we'd like to make sure we stay under that equipment budget. And I think with this, we can still do that, the total equipment budget. So I don't know if we need a
Where are we going to put it when we're
Where's a
not?
new item, I would just say, let's just vote on it.
Okay. That's
Where are we going to put it?
Up to the reservoir when we first get it.
It'll stay there unless we decide to.
If we stay there until we get to a big
Somebody else will have
job,
to pay to deliver it to us, job
No,
site.
we can move it.
Oh, we can?
We got a trailer, yeah, we can.
Okay.
I make a motion, we approve.
I haven't had a chance to get in yet. Mike just accepted it. Mike, a 6-foot, this is the standard 6x20 container that you see on railroad cars.
Yep.
20 feet sounds kind of short for the need of what you might have. It's only 6 feet by 20. When you start getting everything inside, there's not going to be much wiggle room to move around. It doesn't seem so.
we looked at, considered, the only one, the dimensions they come in is you can get one like 12 foot, you can get them 20 foot, or you can get them 40 feet. 40 feet becomes difficult to move around. Also, you start filling that up, that get very heavy, 40 foot long. I mean, that's big. 20 foot's the ideal. We've looked at them all. This is what the crew says. That's the one we need. It's good enough. You can still get in there and move stuff around, but it's not too big where you're not getting lost in there and putting too much in that you can't move it.
So you don't think in 5 years we're going to need another 20-footer?
Not if we build that new garage.
Yeah, new garage.
Well,
we just get a new one. How much is it?
It's $4,900. That's delivered.
Casey, if you do your motion, we can still discuss it
Sure.
after it's seconded.
Yeah, that's technically.
I make a motion, we purchase a 20-foot container from Blackfield.
Yes. Okay, so now, any other questions, Bob?
No, I'm good.
All in favor?
All right, thank you. That's all I had.
All right.
Kind of did a couple new business items, which is kind of nice. So water quality update, I think, is where we're at. Is that correct?
Yep, want to move forward, yeah, is that where we are?
Yeah. We kind of nailed a couple of the new business items done at the activity point of the report, so.
Yeah, well, as I've mentioned before, this is the time of year that we're not doing lake sampling. Sometimes we will get out if the ice conditions warrant, and we do have pretty good ice on the lake, so there might be some limited testing. I don't know if it's going to be later this month, maybe March. We'll see how that goes. But the only thing I've got really to report is the turbidity. That's something we sample every day. And just comparing that to last year, this January compared to last January, the numbers are a little better. I kind of attribute that to the fact, if you remember last year, it was a very warm January. We didn't have ice in until January 31st. It was the end of January before we even had ice last year. This year it came in on the 12th, and I think that's the reason that you're going to see turbidity a little bit lower. Obviously, ice cover is good, and if you have snow on the ice, that's even better. And we had both of those things, so that's kind of what we attribute the low turbidity readings to. That's all I've really got for water quality update.
All right. We got, what's next there? Presidento.
Yeah.
Steve Auburn proposed land use changes.
Yep, so that item, as you know, I've had a few correspondences I've sent you during the month after the last month's meeting, but in your packet is the letter request that I wrote to the drinking water program. Question was raised, will these new septic standards that are being proposed, will that jeopardize our filtration waiver? So I put a copy of that letter that I wrote to Susan Bro from the Maine Drinking Water Program back in January 2022, January 24th. Also in the packet, as you know, we got a response back from the Drinking Water Program on January 31st. I got a letter from Susan Bro, and their response is included in the packet as well. After we got that letter back, I got an email from Trustee Milks asking some questions about the process surrounding this issue. And so following those two documents in your packet is a memo that I wrote to answer those questions. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at these. I did try to answer them in terms of process and not testing parameters or listing a bunch of things to do. I don't know if you've had a chance to go through those, or if you want me to go through them individually, or if everyone is
Well, I think
good or has any questions, I'll do anything you want.
I think it begs the discussion, because when I read the response,
Yep.
it kind of told me that their position is that, well, whatever the science is, we don't care. What we care about is how the lake looks and how it tests.
How it tests. That's
So
what I got it.
this is where the problem lies, is, okay, do you take the chance and change the standard hoping that it doesn't affect the lake? Or are we sure that changing the standard will not affect the lake?
How do you blame the standard for changing the lake
Right,
through
that's what I
testing?
mean. Again, it's one of those sheets
Yeah.
that said it's okay to do this if you want to, but if anything changes from the lake, you're going to lose your filtration.
Yeah. We know that
So
regardless.
becomes a
But does she
suggestion.
decide? Is this the person that decides if we have the, like, who decides?
I think if this really came down to it, I think it would go probably to I'm assuming, I didn't ask her that pointedly, but based upon the way I know they operate, it would probably go to the water quality team. I think there'd be quite a lot of internal discussion within the drinking water program. I don't know if she would be the one who would make the final answer to us, or if that would come from the director. I don't know that. But when this request came to me to follow the chain, I requested this of Denise Doohan. I contacted her and said, hey, here's something that's going to be coming your way. And she recommended that I send that to Susan Bro, who is the senior hydrogeologist.
So she works for Susan.
In the same department. I don't think necessarily Susan is her boss. They work in the same organization. She felt it would be more appropriate to be answered from her rather than
So
herself.
who issues the waiver?
Well, it's the drinking water program. If you're asking for a person,
Not like what, like, what department issues, like, what agency says you're free?
In the paragraph, it says, the DWP is the agency that decides the fate of the waiver.
Yes.
The DWP.
The
Drinking water
program is the
That's this
Drinking water
privacy
program decides the
agency.
These two women work for that thing
Yeah.
that decides.
Yes.
That's,
and I think the last question you had on there is probably, I don't know if that's the most relevant, but that's when you're asking, what about the,
oh, I see.
who is the, the EPA, DEP, how do these people all interact? And that's, and the last question you had is kind of try to break down how
I'm
the
sorry, I
whole
only
thing
read
works.
this here, I didn't see the second part.
That was, I highlighted, that was the key right there at the end of that paragraph.
The bottom line is that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is a federal organization, and there are different regions all throughout the country. That is the organization that puts down the laws and the rules concerning environmental protection, but they have granted primacy to the main drinking water program to enforce their rules.
Okay.
So if our waiver was in question, that would come from the main drinking water program because they have been granted primacy.
The
So
biggest
that's,
concern there would be like the EPA would change the rule that Maine is 5.0 NTO units or whatever for turbidity, right? But Massachusetts is 3.0. That would lower our tolerance. So
Yeah.
they could do that on a regional scale because we're just one of 30 or 40 in the whole U.S. that we don't filter our water. So if they make a big change up there, then the drinking water program has to administer that amongst the unfiltered water.
that's just like Mike just mentioned, the lead and copper rule, that comes from the EPA.
EPA.
But the drinking water program
has to-
administers.
So the rule comes from the EPA, but the enforcement of the rule comes from this agency.
The EPA
Right.
will never
So
say.
the lead and copper rule is going to be enforced by the drinking water program. That's who we're
I
going to be
understand.
sending all of our responses to concerning the
So
lead and
when-
copper. It's the same with this.
So when we had testing that showed that we had to do the alum treatment,
That was
what did they say?
That was, well, if you read that, that is where the DEP comes in. Because the DEP also has a hand in this because they are responsible also for environmental laws and rules. So when we had to get our copper sulfate treatment, when we had to get our alum treatment, that permit came from the Department of Environmental Protection.
Right, but how-
Not from the drinking water program.
But did the drinking water program say you have to do this?
What we did was, this was really, when we did that particular thing, that was a team effort. We had everyone at the table. There was the DEP drinking water program. We had inland fisheries at the table. We had
Lewiston.
pesticide control board. Yeah, obviously, yes, the stakeholder, the city of Lewiston. When it was time to do that, it was really a group decision moving forward.
But who alerted who? Like, did we say to them?
We alerted them that
We
the
have a
water quality
problem?
had degraded. They called the board together. The collective decision was treat the lake.
So they didn't test and say, you're in violation now, you need to do these things. We told them there's a problem?
We were never in violation. We were approaching. We saw triggers that said you need to act, and that's what we did. We saw the triggers. We
So
made the call.
theoretically, if we were to change the septic system, just for argument's sake, we're testing. If we noticed that something changed, we could say, there's a problem.
Yep.
So it's
That
not like
problem's
they're
not-
coming.
The problem's
it's
gonna
not-
continue.
It's not that they're coming and testing and then telling us that you're now in violation.
Correct. They don't test.
It's us.
Right.
For the alum,
Self-governing that way.
for the alum treatment, Mike, what our turbidity was going up?
Well, for the alum treatment, that was based upon, when we had our 2012 algae bloom, the fish kill thing, that's when we hired consultants to come in and let us know what to look for in the future. And that's when we started to trend everything, and we knew charting turbidity, if you see that thing start to grow, the phosphorus is up, the algae counts are up, we knew internally that that was going to be the trigger point to do something about it. And when that happened, that's when we got the team together and we discussed the best course of action. And that's how we decided to do the copper sulfate treatment followed by the alum treatment.
Sid, back to your inquiry. We got the letter from Susan. And at the Watershed Protection Commission meeting last week, Kevin Gagnon said they got a letter too. Can we get a copy of that? Or-
They haven't
They got
gotten
the
their,
identical letter.
They're identical. Okay. Okay.
They asked the same thing and they got the same thing.
So basically, do what you want, but don't test bad, or you're going to be in violation of your waiver.
And then they got to determine that that's the cost, though.
Well,
Because what if...
it doesn't matter what costs it, but
Because we didn't change the septic standards in the Allen, and then we needed to do
Well,
Allen treatment.
that's right, we had changed the septic standards 5 years ago, and this Allen treatment thing solved the problem.
But we didn't change the septic
No, I'm just
standards.
saying, it's hypothetically, if
Right.
we change something like that, and then this turbidity goes up or whatever, are they gonna point right to this decision of the septic, or are they gonna say, no, you can do another Allen treatment and...
What was the cause of the one before? It was that,
There was no one trigger that we could identify.
internal and external loading of phosphorus.
There was a lot,
right?
there
was
was
phosphorus.
there was a lot
Phosphorus.
going on.
Well, we don't know if that can happen again, it could.
It
We
would
didn't know what
actually,
happened, caused it in the
probably.
first place, it could happen again.
so and that's where we've had those maps, and we've alerted like where the sulfur, high concentrates of sulfur are coming from, like up on Wilson Pond. and stuff
Well, we
like
do phosphorus testing in the lake, in the tributaries, so we can trace the major sources of where it's coming from.
Sid, a few years ago, we were going to initiate a reasonably intensive study of phosphorus input from Thompson Brook. What happened?
Townsend
What's the status with that? We're going to take a stronger look at it than we had before.
We did that.
And how'd that come out?
Again, there was no smoking gun. Even with that intensive testing that was done, it was just, it's present. And the biggest issue that came from that is the base mineral that's in Townsend Brook is the mineral apatite. Apatite contains phosphorus. So as the soil erodes, the brook comes through it, it naturally gives off phosphorus. There was no one source of that.
Thank you.
It's present. Doesn't mean there aren't some, but there was no one trigger that said, hey, get rid of this source and we're out of the woods. It just wasn't like that.
I think what's
It's more
important,
cumulative.
what's important for trustees on our level of looking at all of this, we're going to learn a lot after this presentation tonight. I don't know who can stay for that. Can you guys all stay for that? And there's a whole layer of science that's been looked at with this. So if we've got engineer stamps saying that we can do this or do that, me personally, I am comfortable with that.
So what is, does anybody have an idea, rundown, what they're gonna talk about tonight? I know they're talking about the septic standards.
I heard it's a PowerPoint presentation. They're going to have a
We didn't
couple
have
of
a chance to have any
speakers.
advance look at that, so we're gonna be as surprised as the public tonight,
Yeah.
which I think that's kind of unfair. We're looked at as being the governing body.
well, they presented it before to city council.
Yeah, so I thought that'd be something we could have had previous to this, because we may have questions by people in the audience, or somebody might ask us, so what's going on?
There's another question. Are we going to be answering questions? I don't think, this is a city thing. I don't think
This
we
is
should
not
be
our-
answering
we-
questions.
No,
We should have no part except audience.
This is information,
But
this
this
is
is it, but
information.
still, it's a city thing, and the city shouldn't be setting this up and then drawing us in, because then we become targets. We aren't prepared for these things.
I'll answer
And
any
you need to be aware and prepared before you start becoming a target. And we should not be targets tonight. It's a city presentation. We should just be watching. Sid should not be answering questions. We should not be answering questions. We can put input as a citizen, as a ratepayer, as a taxpayer, but not as a trustee, because this is not a trustee function.
We're not offering any policies, so
But
there's
it's
no,
not quoted-
there's
I don't
no
think-
questions to answer.
So that we should not be solicited. Sid should not be solicited for anything tonight either, as a superintendent.
Well, what, if somebody asks Sid a question, what should he do?
Sid,
my
okay,
thought on
Sid,
this-
you may be in the spotlight, so I'd like you to respond.
My thought on this is, this, I think eventually this board will need to take some consensus stand on how to address or what we think about this issue, because it's going to affect our watershed. We don't know what that is yet, because There's still a lot of questions being answered from the trustee board. We're pursuing answers. We don't have it all yet. I think at the conclusion of this, I think everyone will be a little better informed about it, and then maybe next month, or I'm not sure when, but I think it's a little preliminary. I wouldn't feel comfortable going around this table right now asking, what do you think, what do you think, because I think there's still some more information.
I know we
that
have
need.
time to do that, but my concern was because tonight, it is a presentation, not the first time this is done, this presentation's been done. And we should be more informed, because again, we're writing, in the process of rewriting our bylaws, which affect the governance of the lake. And we can put a stop to something that doesn't look like it's right, if we so choose. If we don't like what's going on, we can instruct the Watershed Protection Commission to stop that or to do something about it. We have that power, but we don't have the information until tonight.
Well,
which I
in my
wish we had
opinion,
earlier.
what this is for them to present to us. We're not, if anybody asks us, I say, look, we're gathering information. We don't have an opinion yet. We don't have enough information. That's the answer.
Good point. Yeah, exactly, that's the answer, that's it.
We're gathering information.
I think that's where we are. I do think it will be important moving forward to have a consistent answer from this board.
I think what.
I think the public is going to be looking for it.
Well, I think we need to have an answer to a policy recommendation.
Yep.
There's no policy recommendation right now. This is just presentation of a study that the city paid for about the lake and what the potential, what the things that we may or may not be able to do with the lake, and a presentation of that information. And then different people have different opinions, but until there's a policy put forward saying we want to build, Wally World on Route 4 and have, water country swimming in the lake because the study says so. That's a policy then. That's a proposal.
Well, I see what they have in there as a proposal, changing the septic ordinance. That's a proposal.
That's one of the
If they're going to be changing the watershed overlay ordinance, that's something that this board has to weigh in on.
Meaning they're moving, like they're suggesting, they're recommending that we move that border from the front of the.
Basically, we have two choices. We accept the science, or we ask our own consultant to review the science. That would be the due diligence. Other than that, what else can we do? We're not the experts.
Well, again, we've asked the Watershed Protection Commission to protect the lake, and we've also had
They
them
do
let
four
them do their
times
own-
a- four
let them
times
use their
a-
rules
a
to do
year.
so. It's their rule on the septic systems. It's their rule, not ours.
Nope, it's a city rule. It's a city ordinance.
City rule, but it's not ours. We have a bylaws that say protect the
No,
lake. protect the lake,
we have
right?
a watershed ordinance that we drafted back in 1974. We worked with the city to adopt that. We have
This
an
is it.
identical ordinance.
So that's,
But
this-
it's
That's
still,
it right
it's
there.
still a city ordinance.
okay.
And we're trying to find out, because it affects the bylaws for the protection of Lake Auburn, Jason and I have asked Jim to see, we need to find the minutes and everything, from everything that we can find so far, including looking at the city side. This ordinance was, with the aid of the water district, was adopted by the city. It's a city ordinance.
It's
It's
a
been
district ordinance as well.
But that's it. Well, there's no record of it being a district ordinance. So that's.
Sure there is. In 70, that was that was done by the water district and adopted by the city.
Right, adopted by the city as a city ordinance.
Yep,
Yes.
right.
So
Then once it was adopted by the city ordinance, they go through, they've amended it before, they've done updates. We've never been involved in those updates other than,
That's a shame on us thing. That should
Well,
never have been.
right.
I don't know when it might have been done, but they're not identical anymore.
but it's like, if you go to our website, we have the bylaws for the protection of Lake Auburn. This is listed, this has never ever been something that is enforced because it's always been the same document on the city side. Over the years, the cities have updated it. So basically, worst case scenario for the trustees is we have to amend our protection of Lake Auburn bylaws in order to affect anything that might hurt our water. So this is going to be city handled. And you can check on that, Sid, and I know Jim's, because we just met.
So if the city wants to change the septic system, we have to amend that.
No,
No.
no, because this was created in 74, 75. In fact, it was a letter that I just received from Phil Tarr, a copy of it, and that's the only thing the city has on their side that says this is just recommended language. The city took it and adopted it and made it their ordinance. We have since then have never touched this document, never revised it, never amended it. We don't even have minutes that say, okay, we created this ordinance, it was adopted in such and such, like the protection of Lake Auburn ordinances. We actually have a stamp, we know the date, it was in the minutes, the trustees approved it. The trustees just worked with the city to give them this
And then they adopted
as a recommendation from staff, and they adopted the ordinance. So that's the big thing, Sis. We need to continue looking for something that says this is an official record or document on our side. Because if it is, it's already changed a bunch of times, and we need to get updated to what the city currently has if we want to keep it the same. If not, how does someone put in a septic system and be okay with the city ordinance, but be in violation of our ordinance? How do we enforce that? Do we want to enforce that?
Yeah, right.
No, we don't want to deal with that. We just want.
I think we should. I don't think we want the city in charge of an ordinance that affects lake protection. I think that's your duty as trustees.
We are the city, Sid. I mean, he's
No,
a former counselor.
you're a
He's
water.
currently on the council.
Well, you're a
He's been-
representative from the city, but you are all water trustees, and it's your duty to
And one of the,
follow the charter, which is.
however, our charter is to primarily to protect the waiver, right? I mean, that's really what the whole gist of this is all about. So.
No, the charter says nothing about the waiver.
Well, I mean, the bylaw, right?
And I think that's a good introduction to this, which is on the agenda today, if we're done with this.
Well, I think it's important, we have to identify, one, like, where's the authority? What is the authority that decides whether or not you can put a septic in? Because there's houses in there's houses with septics in the water district right now.
And they were built after 74.
They certainly were. And I just replaced a septic system at my camp that was built before 1974, and the one we put in is state-of-the-art.
Before adoption of that, everything's grandfathered.
Here's the authority. You just asked a question.
1974.
We're going to give you an answer. Here's the authority. Section 60, 950, Division 4, Lake Auburn Watershed Overlay District, last amended in 2009. And there's the MSRA whatever number. That is the authority right now for the septic ordinance under the city's purview.
And so if you put there were houses built in there after 1974,
I know there are, in the watershed.
in the watershed.
So they found the 30 inches to restrictive layer, 36 inches.
So that particular ordinance that you're talking about, that's a city ordinance.
Yep.
So who, if I say, all right, I want to build a house, like who we know somebody built a house that was in the water overlay.
Let me jump to your answer. Your inspection, this
Yeah.
has, right in the city ordinance, we have, as a water district, the authority to review the plans, anything to do with the septic system, from the test pit to final inspection, we have a play in reviewing that. We have a review authority. But we're not the ones that grant the permit. It's the permit.
So if I have a piece of land in the overlay, in
Yeah.
the water, and I have a piece of land I want to build a house,
You go to city planning.
go to city planning,
You
that
get-
ordinance is pertinent onto whether I can or can't do it.
Yeah, your soil scientist will know that. He'll design an HHE 200. You'll go to there, they'll get your permit, but before they give you the permit, they're going to send it to Sid, which now I guess Erica looks at. Erica reviews it, makes sure, same with the phosphorus control plan. We have review authority.
Right, so it goes to Sid. And then you get to say yes or no?
Staff recommendations.
Well, you need to meet the ordinance, which is 36 inches of separation between seasonal groundwater. And if you've got that, you can build in the watershed with all the other things that are included within that zoning ordinance.
Is there a setback distance from the lake that?
Oh yeah, it's all in there, in the
How
ordinance.
far, okay, how many feet, do you know?
Well,
It's in the ordinance.
it's right in, it's.
Yeah,
it's
the
in
shoreline zoning trumps this, but it's, I know it's 100 and 250. So the 250 is what? Septic, and the 100 is any kind of structure?
Yeah, that's shoreline zoning, I thought that was more.
Yeah, so what you're talking about homes that are
Those
being
the
built
standards are in there, Bob, right?
hundreds and
That-
hundreds of
that
feet,
ordinance.
thousands of feet away from the lake. Because if you're gonna build within the lake, the shoreland zoning, that's a huge issue, unless you've got existing structures.
So those houses that are there now had to have already been there
Yeah.
before 1970.
Their grandfather and their replacement cisterns are grandfathered.
Yeah,
So-
otherwise, you can't condemn a grandfathered building because they're septic systems.
So the big question
Yeah,
tonight,
go Casey.
Isn't our charter from 1923
Yep.
specifically say that the Auburn Water District trustees have the power to regulate the watershed and make rules that have the
Enforcement of
law.
municipal ordinances.
Yes.
And this is it, we
Not,
have it
not
right here.
inconsistent with state law.
The bylaws for protection of Lake Auburn to amend and review every 5 years, we haven't done that, but that's getting done. And that's, when you're ready, that's on the
But
agenda.
our charter
I'll be
gives us
quick.
the power
Right.
to make laws consistent, with the
Consistent
power,
with-
with the power of
ordinances.
the city council ordinances.
which means that
Yep.
they could change that ordinance and we'd have to accept their changes.
No,
No.
no,
No,
we
we would
could,
have-
we
we
could
tell
tell,
them
we
we
could
can't
tell
change
them
it.
that it's inconsistent with lake protection, we could fight that, if that's something we believe we
Well-
want to do.
We would have to provide something that gives them, you can do this, you can't do that.
We
Can we
have to
just
trust
bring
their
in-
science or come up with our own consultants to
Right.
say the science is wrong.
That's what I'm saying, so if,
Well, I guess your question is, if the city wants to change that ordinance, do they have to go through us first? Or can they change it?
or can they
We
say,
could-
somebody can build a house, and
They could
we
be,
say, no, you can't?
they could be challenged.
It could be challenged, obviously, we could get up there and talk in front of city council.
They could be
but if they
legally
decide-
challenged by this board.
Yeah. Lewiston and Auburn could legally sue the city for making the change.
Which happened the last time the change was wanted to make in the watershed. If you remember a few years back, I remember Frost got up there and threatened to sue if the city changed the overlay. So if that can happen, it's a threat.
Which is
Now,
then
whether it-
why we probably wanted to do the study. So could we also say you can build a house there? And just our authority gives us the authority to tell somebody, yeah, go ahead and build a house there?
Supposedly you can, you just can't have septic. So if you can't have septic, how can you have a house?
Right.
But
I
supposedly
don't think you
can
get an
build a
occupancy
house.
permit with
You
a,
can't get a permit without working sewer.
without a, yeah, you
No.
can't have holding tanks, there's a certain, because remember, anything that's not in the local ordinance, we follow the state rules, the states adjust a lot of that stuff.
So we don't have direct authority to say no, but we can take them to court and force the city not to change the ordinance. Or threaten.
Our next step would be to hire a consultant to just say, okay, we don't believe this. So that's gonna be the trustee's
Well, I think what
decision.
we want to do, we want to take the science, that the city spent $100,000 on
I know.
this study. And they're legitimate people that did the study. They're legitimate,
I'm not so sure I'd go that far. I look at the executive summary, and there's all kinds of things that they warn you about. You do, if you allowed 100 more houses in there, that would be bad for the lake. But go change the septic system so that you can allow that, but you'd have to change the zoning so that you can't just have all these houses popping up around the lake.
And they did say that that might force filtration, which is hard to talk about a no net benefit.
Yeah,
But
Yes.
why
well, the
are
executive summary isn't science. That's an executive summary.
well,
Well, if you poison the lake with something if you need filtration. You poison it with something if you need filtration. And this will be a man-made poison.
If it tests bad.
and even if you built a filtration plant, you still gotta protect the lake.
We gotta listen to this hearing and have the same
Right, that's it.
conversation
That's
in a special
Like,
meeting or the next
my
meeting.
biggest issue with all of this is that it seems like everyone's got a predisposed. Like, we've got houses that are 20 feet from the lake, 100 feet from the lake now that have been there for forever. We could put 10 houses up and eliminate that one, and the lake would get cleaner.
because the one is out of compliance
Right.
and the new one's being watered.
Exactly.
Standard.
So the idea that it's just an absolute that we can't, I mean, we should be looking, at if we're gonna be looking at this, is why don't we improve the existing septic systems? I'll use our camp at our lake, that is a perfect example. We took it was a round can. And we put one of those Enviro, super Enviro septic systems
I
in. We
bought
don't
one
want
of those, I bought one of those 5 years ago.
Yeah. So how many septic systems that were put in before 2009 or in the 80s that are worse than if we put 10 houses with the state of the art in?
Well, my question has always been, can a house be built that's not going to affect lake quality? And I've heard several things. First of all, the septic, okay, we build a man-made septic, answer that question. Well, then there's the impervious surfaces, then of course there's the fertilizers or whatever else that might be used on the property for landscaping purposes, whatever. But if we answered all those things, come up with a plan and a program that guarantees, and the homeowner is required, codicil within their will, within their deed, whatever, it requires that this is what you do and you subject to certain inspections on a regular basis, that you're not doing anything to affect the lake quality. Is there such a thing? And now I'm maybe being a little facetious here, but I believe some folks believe nothing is going to work. We have to leave it just the way it is. The only way you can protect the lake is never do anything more than we have done.
And Andy, I would not be opposed to that if the city of Lewiston came out and said, hey, we're going to pay 60% of the cost of you keeping that
Right.
ordinance. Because that's a cost of doing business.
It is huge.
It's a cost to maintain the waiver.
Because, we are, the
City of Lewiston can
the
come right out
taxpayers of Auburn
and say, hey, we're
are
gonna pay for this.
subsidizing Lewiston water.
And when Lewiston went to Augusta and complained about the state requirement, we were able to, remember that was the thing we talked about 3 years ago, council was going to try to change the income requirement, and they said, well, we changed it for the overlay, so it didn't include the overlay. So the adjustment to the income did not affect the overlay, and we made that change. And that can be done again. So how does that affect Lewiston if we decide to change the income standard, but then we don't include the overlay in that standard? So it protects the lake,
Yeah.
but the rest of the ag zone, there's no income requirement. So how does Lewiston get involved in that? But they're, again, getting involved in our politics by shooting down a proposal that might work for part of the ag zone. Maybe not the overlay that's in the watershed, but they want to shoot the whole thing
Yeah,
down.
that was bad.
That was bad. They don't even, see what I mean? People have these emotions and saying, nothing's gonna work. We gotta, no, don't take that chance. But the science is, no, never. So, what is better for our future? One
agree.
extreme or the other? We have two extremes here. Nobody wants to take that gamble that by doing it right and building responsibly according to the science, even if it isn't 100, maybe we make a restriction, only 25 houses are allowed, but I don't know.
I think we have to have the
That's not going to affect the
conversation.
quality of the lake. Why would we let it happen? Except, well, it might. Well, what if the science proves that it won't? We still can't do it because it might. So that's the argument that we're up against. And that's what this room of people are.
And it's how much risk you're willing to accept. If you believe that,
Well, if you believe the science, the risk is, it's like anything. COVID, the whole thing about follow the science, right? COVID.
but once, if you build a house, that house isn't coming out.
Absolutely.
Ever.
That house is never going to cause a
Well,
problem.
what about the houses that are sitting right next to the lake now? That probably people are
That
gonna
have
show up
lousy-
tonight and say, we don't want any more houses built in the watershed. And I would say, well, are you gonna move out of your house?
Well, again, there's that argument. That's right. Kind of like what's going on in the ag zone.
And I don't
Yeah.
think that anybody has said, well, what about the recourse for the Auburn taxpayer? That all of this land, how many acres are now restricted that you can't build on? 8,000 or something?
Well, just what LawPEC owns is between 1,800 and 2,000.
2,000
But-
acres.
But that's just LawPEC land. I mean,
So
you're
the
talking about
LawPEC land,
the total acreage in the watershed in the city jurisdiction,
It's probably 8,000 or something.
8,000.
Within the physical boundary of the watershed.
we're taking those 8,000 acres that could have
I'm
property
not sure if that
tax.
includes neighboring towns. I don't want to throw that number out because I.
Well, let's say 2,000 then. 2,000
Oh, no,
that
2,000
LawPEC
we know
has.
LawPEC owns, so it's
Right.
got to be at least
That-
8,000.
That is off of the tax roll. That's a nonprofit that owns.
It is an all or nothing within the entire watershed.
Right.
And that's what we'll find, the argument is, no, it's nothing.
I
Or,
just think we
you know,
need to have the
is there
conversation.
some-
There's no policy put forward, so there's no proposal put forward that is an official, authoritative proposal that says, we propose as the city council that we do this. And it hasn't been done. This is just the conversation.
Well, yeah, it's going to come before council.
Yeah.
Whatever they're talking about tonight will come before council.
And then if the council was to say,
The
we
last one-
propose this and we pass it and it comes forward at that point, I mean, we should have, all this information should be out, and then
Right.
if you know,
You have to
Isn't
schedule
this-
this, Steve. I know it's going to be sent down to the planning board. I know it's phased. That it's A, B, C, D, and the D phase of this is specifically talking about the standards for the subsurface, surface water.
Subsurface
So
wastewater
there you go,
disposal system.
subsurface wastewater disposal systems. That is prioritized as priority D, but I believe that's going to the planning board next month.
well,
That's kinda what I heard.
What is the planning board's responsibility?
Well,
The planning board's responsibility is, does this fit the comprehensive plan and does it fit ordinance? Theirs is not a policy board.
That's right.
The city council is the policy.
right, but it's being sent down to them for opinion, then it's going to be sent back up.
Whether or not, and their opinion shouldn't be, oh, well, I think this might hurt the water. That's not what their opinion is, does this fit the comprehensive plan, and does this fit ordinance? That's it. They're not city council junior. They're not elected officials, they're appointed. They are policy.
Well, how did they
City
come up with the
councils.
recommendation of the ag zone with that buffer increase? And their recommendation was not to do that.
But because, again, we have responsibility creep going on in the planning board level. And we have people going in bullying the planning board to get them because, as if they have the ability to policy make at the
To make
planning
a
board.
recommendation or not recommendation. And they could make a negative recommendation based on the idea that they are afraid that it might hurt the lake. So they don't want to be involved in recommending anything.
That's
that
right.
might hurt the lake.
That's right. And so we've now got an unelected board making policy decisions for the elected board.
You know, the sad thing is what we talked about was the other towns and cities, other towns that are not following any of these regulations, that are, I'm sure, causing the problem that we're trying to avoid. So it's kind of like global warming, where we do a good job cleaning up our area, but the next state over doesn't.
And China's
So,
running their coal plants at full speed.
Yeah, it creates a very frustrating situation. We could still hit the filtration because Turner or Buckley or one of those towns don't do their job. And we'd end up putting the bill
And I think we
for
need
something they're
to,
doing.
we need to, as we're having this conversation with Lewiston, and they've decided that they want to wade into Auburn politics, that we need to have that discussion, like how much is this costing the Auburn taxpayer to provide clean drinking water to Lewiston? Because it's costing a chunk of money.
And the ratepayers should be paying that 60/40.
Steve,
That's
I
it. You can't have
understand
their
the
cake
next
and
agenda,
eat it.
the agenda for the next city council meeting, there's gonna be something on it about the first reading of something relative to the ag zone, or something that they're gonna do the first reading on, and the second
don't know.
reading becomes official. Do you know what that is? I just got a little whiff of something, and I'm wondering, is this something that all of a sudden is gonna be, whoa, we're gonna make these changes, and
It's got to go to planning board first, right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
I just got a little bit from something, there was gonna be something in the next city council meeting.
I know
relative to
something
the
that
ag
was
zone.
tabled at the planning board about, that something was tabled until next meeting, the last time,
That's the planning board,
the planning board.
not the city council.
No.
Okay, so, thank you, wait and see.
Because you don't have another, we have a city council meeting on the 21st,
22nd, because it's a holiday, the 21st.
so we should be receiving that packet
Right.
tomorrow, Friday.
I have not seen the agenda.
Okay.
But I think if we're gonna be good stewards, if our responsibility is to oversee the water, that there's clean water. I raised my kids, they drink out of the tap water. I've drank every day I've lived in Auburn out of the
Me
tap.
too, me too.
I have 7 families living in the buildings that I own that are responsible for the drink out of the tap water. I don't want the water being dirty any more than anybody else. I drink out of it every day. But I think we have to be good stewards of our responsibility, and we have to be willing to listen to what the new science says, because we're also need to be good stewards of our customers. And as citizens of Auburn, Lewiston is getting a great deal on this.
I personally don't want to accept their report as the perfect answer in science.
Speaking of
And
losing,
that's fine, I'm not telling you you have to, but I think open-minded to
Is
listen.
there someone else that could do that, could clarify?
If we were to agree with that, I wouldn't agree to it until we had our water people review the report or do their own, because you could just.
Or our own.
Which water
you could ju-
people?
You could just, well, the engineer, who would do that?
If we were gonna hire someone,
Yeah.
We could look at that and either yay or nay the science.
Then, I mean,
Yeah.
let's propose it, because, I mean,
It's just, to say that their report is perfect science and they know everything.
I think we can, the report, I know.
I've never said
the
that.
existing report, if we talk about our experts, to me, our experts are the organizations and the regulators of the
Yeah, but
water.
they've said in their letter that, whatever
I
you
mean, those-
do, what is the effect of the lake that we're worried about. So put in the septic system if you want to, but if it affects the lake, then we're gonna get involved. So they haven't said no to the septic
well,
system.
without building houses, we've already had a problem in the lake. Without building houses in Auburn, we had a problem in the lake that we had to address, and we didn't lose our waiver because we addressed it.
right,
And we don't know what the cause was, is what you're telling me.
No single cause. There's a bunch of things you could point to, things we're doing.
The water
But there wasn't one single cause. It was
The
cumulative.
water getting warmer,
Yeah.
the global environment getting warmer.
Which again is out of our control right now. We'll try to do our best, but, let's
It was
face it.
natural stuff going on with the
Well,
lake, right? It wasn't man-made created.
There's a lot
We
of
don't
stuff.
know.
What do you think it would cost to have an engineer look at that and decide, somebody in septic engineering and also could say where this goes? If we had
To
contrary.
review it, to basically review that report and comment.
Not the whole report, the idea of the septic, first of all, not the whole report. The idea that, is this septic system really what the science is saying in this report? Does it work? Because if it works, then we don't have to worry about the
Andy,
resulting.
the city has hired the leading expert.
I know, but nobody wants to believe it. I don't know if people
What are you
say, I
gonna
don't
do,
want
find
to
someone substandard that works at state
believe it. No, find a
wastewater?
third party, impartial, third party.
You can.
I wouldn't agree that they're guaranteed to be the finest experts in the business. I just,
They were
David
the only
Rourke
one
has
that
been doing
replied.
this forever.
I think they were the only one that provided a proposal.
They actually were the only ones that actually answered the RFP.
No.
The city study.
That's a city study.
Right.
They've since hired a state expert who's retired, David Rourke, who's again, you're putting the cart before the horse. You guys haven't even listened to the presentation yet. It's interesting.
Well, no, I'm trying to prepare us because
Well,
we haven't
prepare.
had that information.
Prepare.
One thing I
Have an
mentioned
open
too.
mind.
One thing I mentioned at the commission meeting, which I think is a real shame, is that FB Environmental never came back and did a public presentation on their report. The city spent $100,000 on that. It never. I think a lot of these questions that are spinning around, everyone's picking parts out of that study and moving forward with it. And I think a lot of these questions could be
Well,
answered if
You're
there
the
was a public
superintendent, ask
presentation.
Phil to have them come.
I've done that.
What did he say?
He said there's no money. There was no money appropriated to have the consultant come back. I told him. I said, why don't you have
Why
the
don't we pay
consultant
for
come
it
back?
then? If it's that important, why don't we pay for it?
It's happening tonight.
Well, I just think it's
Right, what is-
it's just causing a lot of issues that they haven't done it. Who pays for it? I guess that could be discussed, but to
We
me
should
it
have to
was
pay for them to do a
unfortunate that never occurred.
Well,
Because-
this is, and again, we just bring it up, and this is the first time that we're hearing that they won't come back and do a.
Well, the city hasn't appropriated any money to have them come back.
Yeah, but my point is that that's the first time I've heard that.
Really? Well,
Yeah,
that's-
that's-
Well, it's the first, again,
Why do a study if you can't have the presenter come and present the
right, and
basics?
why isn't that, how many meetings have we had since that, and why is that not an issue?
They
Why
had
have
the
that not been brought up?
They had the preliminary presentation,
Yeah.
I was there now.
Yeah.
They never had the full-blown.
that's before the report was available.
Yeah. The
That was,
executive
that
summary.
was last October.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know why they would,
Right,
they
so-
price, they charge enough money to come back. and spend it
Again,
with
and my
us.
question, I guess, I don't understand if, for someone that's been adamantly against this, why would we not say to the trustees, did you know that there's no money for bringing these people back to, and that's an issue that I have. Until now, I didn't even know that was an issue.
You did.
With you, I didn't know that was your issue.
They should come back.
It's, to me, all
Well,
I've
when I-
seen
when I-
is
when I-
people saying why we can't do this, instead of saying, these are the things that I need to have accomplished in order for me to consider the information.
Because we never asked Sid for the follow-up on it either, so
No.
it's the board. We
Yeah,
gotta look in the mirror because we didn't ask Sid to do a follow-up.
I understand, but there's a certain amount.
But if you remember, Bob, the time they said, we're gonna come back and do a full-blown presentation. I remember all this
Yeah.
happened. They did that preliminary presentation. They're gonna come back, because they gotta tweak a few things or whatever, and they'll be back with a full-blown presentation. Then they never showed up. So I don't know why they never showed up. You're saying it's because of the money, I don't know. But
Is there
never
something
came
they don't
back
want
with
us
a
to see?
But to
full-blown
me,
presentation.
this is one thing that I do. I'm on this board. I got a full-time job, I got a business, I'm on city council, I got a million other things going on. But this is the only thing that Sid is doing, is this. This is something that, if this is the issue, and then why are we not, why are you not telling me, you're the representative of city council, find out, and we got $15 million in ARPA money. We'll move something around and get the money for this. Why am I not,
Yeah.
granted, I'll take responsibility that I don't know that. But as the president of this, I would think you should call me and say, they're not willing to pay for having these guys come and do a presentation. This is what I thought. This is city coming and presenting, but this is something that this is what we're doing. Why, if you're not happy with this report we spent $100,000 on, and you're the leading authority on the water district, tell me what you want me to do. That's where I'm at. And if that's what you're saying, then I'll do whatever we got to do in the city to get them out here to come and present to us in executive session if we have to.
Well, it should be.
I know, but I'm saying.
Maybe
whatever.
Sid before like one of these presentations.
Yes.
Yeah. I think you should. Good. I think that'll be good if you effective that.
I would be more than happy to do that, because I want to find out, how do we make this an even playing field for the taxpayers of Auburn to stop subsidizing the Lewiston ratepayers by having all this property that we can't do anything with and not collect any taxes on. And that means people that live downtown, or someone who lives in Ward 4 that has a septic system and a well that isn't even on water or sewer, is subsidizing the Lewiston ratepayers.
So I think that we'll have to, tonight's presentation, I think we should look at who we can hire if we have to.
And we can call a special meeting based on what we hear tonight, right? Just
Yeah.
takes one or two trustees, right? Get a hold of you. Otherwise, it'll be at the next regular meeting.
Because
But
it's either science or it's not.
In any meeting that I've been in, I've never heard anybody say they can't do a presentation because there's no money for it. I have not heard that.
Maybe I assumed too much. I was told that several times.
I did hear the same thing.
I didn't hear it.
Something about money,
Again, I'm not living
they
it.
didn't plan it out, all these different hearings.
Again, I got a lot of other things. I very well could have missed it. But if that's what we want to do, then
Well, I think it's our duty to understand. that
Absolutely.
We either have to say yay or nay to the science.
Right.
That seems to be key to this proposal. Somehow we gotta feel confident when we say yay or
Right.
nay.
And clearly, Sid, you're against you are clearly against what this science, this $100,000 study has said. You seem to be clearly against it. So, I mean, that's,
Well, you read. I sent you all a memo, and I read it in front of you. That's my stand on it. I'm the superintendent. You're the trustees. I mean, I have a lot of experience, and there's 100 years of doing things for the district for a certain purpose. What was presented, there's a lot of that you're going to hear tonight that I don't disagree with at all. Low impact development standards, that's probably a great thing. That should probably be adopted. specifically changing the subsurface wastewater standards, allowing mounded systems. It's going to add 100 homes to the watershed. I can't, as superintendent, say that's going to be a good thing for the lake, and let's do it. If they can present something that says that's not going to happen and that's not going to be a bad thing for the lake, I mean, everyone can make up their own mind, but I don't think I'm doing my job as a superintendent if I'm not giving you the best advice I have.
I guess
If it's not what you want to hear, then, well, I'm not a trustee.
Well,
But-
what the science, what these consultants are doing is making recommendations. The city council hasn't proposed anything. So they can say, we want to build 100 houses, and you're against that, and that's fine, but that's not what the city council has proposed.
Okay.
So, I think it has to, we're looking for is, and I know that, this is what I'm looking for, is an evaluation of what they're saying in your expertise and cooperation with what Dan is doing, what the science is saying, with what the city wants to do, with what the comprehensive plan says, and come up with something that really does make sense. But the idea that we can't do anything is not.
I've never said, I don't know where you're coming up with that we can't do anything. I've never said that.
That may be my interpretation of what you're.
It wasn't my intent to say we could never do anything with the lake. We're doing tons of things with the lake all the time, and a lot more.
You said 0 houses.
All I'm telling you is the proposal that the consultant put forward to change the rules allowing mounded septic systems, which is going to result in 100 new homes in accordance with their own study and their own interpretation, I don't think is a good thing.
Again,
And I'll
mounded septic is one thing. The
Yep.
100 homes is theirs.
if they
What if
Well,
there's
that's all
one
part of-
home with a mounded septic? Is that okay? Again,
Well,
we're putting a
whose
number
is
on
that
it.
going to be? either you allow it or you don't. You can't say, okay, the first 10 to win the lottery and put in. I mean, how can you say only one more home? I mean,
Again,
either you allow it or you don't. I
That
don't know
was
how
a
you
potential number, just like
administer
the
it.
what, the
Right.
ag zone, when they talked about the
that's
income.
what policy does. That's what the city council says. And you say, someone has come forward with the development, this is what it is. Then it goes through the approval process. But, so I don't know, someone might say we want to allow, the city council says we would like to allow in this particular area 10 houses built. At that point, you would take a look at that and say, with this mounded system, as an example, with all of these mitigation techniques that we're doing,
Advanced
Advanced-
science-based building techniques.
would these 10, a concrete proposal, would this be okay? But it's 100.
That's not what's before me right now. That's
But
not.
there's nothing before you, it's just a report.
But why is it even out there if there's nothing that would be proposed?
Again,
Haven't we heard the mayor propose 100 homes?
No.
nobody's proposed anything.
I've
There
heard
is
that 100 kicked
there is
around.
no development.
I've
Then
heard
why
that.
are we meeting? I don't understand what this meeting is for if there's nothing being proposed.
That is a study that people say that they're putting information out, but they're not the city council. They're not a development. They're not a developer.
But there are proposed changes. when they talk
There's
about that.
proposed changes, but the city hasn't proposed any changes yet.
No, because it's all the thinking stage. It's
Right.
part of the comprehensive plan and part of our planning. Bob, your 100 houses is what, somebody just looked at a map and said, this potentially could be 100 houses.
I think that's
depending on the
stated
acreage
right in the
size.
study.
That's not saying, it's actually from that study. It said potentially looking at the lot sizes and whatever, could potentially, 100 houses could be built. Now, that would all depend on how it's divided up, or somebody sells some of their land and subdivides it, where you allow this. And my feeling, and I always was upset with the ag zone, because ever since we've been having the discussion in the ag zone, it was either all or nothing. And so we took all the ag zone or none of it, instead of saying, well, you know, this portion can be developed, this portion can, but this can't. So with the watershed, are there places that are 2,000 feet away from the lake that would, that's still in the watershed technically, that could fit this profile and be okay to build on? And then you still have to have the septic, right septic, and all the other restrictions, because it's in the watershed. But is it far enough away from the water, so with all these standards, it's not going to affect water quality?
Right.
Well, yeah, there are, but I don't want to do it anyway, because it's in the watershed, and I got to protect the lake. Those are the answers we're going to hear tonight from the public. Because they've been told if you build one house, you're going to affect the water
Exactly.
quality.
Right.
You're gonna hear so many, like,
We as a board have got to look at the science and make a decision based on what is reality.
And I'm
And if
going
we're gonna fight
also,
something, we gotta fight based on that, not on emotions.
and I was in the city council meeting where you got up and spoke. So I'm listening to what you said. Where you said you're against this.
And at that same meeting, I also said that I think the consultant should come back and make a study. I think I said that the same night.
And it would behoove us, if we're asked to
Yeah.
make any kind of policy decision, to get all the
It's-
information we can before we make that policy.
It seems like there's an animosity. Animosity is what I perceive. That, you know, that I would bring up, that, again, my role and what I do is I have this much time in the water department. I have many other responsibilities where it seems to me that it's the hands up, we don't want to do this. And we're not going to entertain any more information. We're just going to go through the motions, and we're just going to obfuscate and delay and impede all that we can. That's what I'm. And someone said, well, we're not putting 100 houses. We could never do 100 houses. What if we did based on this science? And someone says, wow, 2,000 feet from the lake, we could put 10 houses in, and we're going to wait 5 years, test all the time, and someone says, wow, nothing changed on the lake. Why don't we do another 10 houses?
That's not being proposed right now.
Nothing's been proposed.
No,
It's
but
just
Well,
this.
I'm not saying I'm against, if something comes before us, then we have to address it.
But that's the kind of
If
conversation.
that kind of thing comes up, I mean, it might.
But that's the kind of conversation I would like coming from you.
And that's fine. If there's proposals coming up, we should,
Or compromise.
they should be addressed. They should be
Compromise.
looked
I'm
at.
asking for.
Somebody brought up.
I'm not saying necessarily
Cooperation.
approve, but listen to, like we're listening to tonight, to this presentation.
And that would help dramatically with this, and again, like I keep comparing it to the ag because it's the same story. Those that were against it were against it, period. We don't want to talk about any compromises.
Right,
Well, is there a compromise to, what, you know?
right.
gotta be.
And is there houses that are close to the lake now that if we start recognizing better science, that we can do and go and help homeowners that might have an old septic system?
You're gonna learn tonight that
That's
over
great.
80% of the septic systems in the watershed are over 30 years old. That's the lifetime that the older designs were built for. These newer systems are good for 40 to 50 years. The best thing we could do is get Lawbeck and Lewiston and in this division and help these systems get replaced properly.
Yes.
Well, that's
You're
the
talking,
other
you're
part
talking
of it too.
80% of maybe what, 500 homes?
Yeah.
I mean, if we replace those 80% septic systems with a new system like what Casey and what we just did in ours, we could probably build the 100 houses and improve the lake.
Just by taking the houses that are there now and getting them up to standard.
Right,
Yeah. Somehow we're not addressing that.
exactly. And that's, I guess,
Because
where I
part
sit.
of the ordinance would be requiring all grandfathered homes when they need to replace a septic system, if they have to do this type of a septic system.
And I'm sure if you were a homeowner in there and you had an
Might
old
hear that
septic
tonight.
system, you might want, so I guess that's what I'm
Point of
looking for.
order.
Go ahead.
We got 20 minutes left, 3 or 4 agenda items.
Yeah, let's get through.
I'm good, if I can, I'll be really quick. I gave you guys, because I knew this might run over, this is a handout from Jim Cross. Remember the 8-page letter he created for the bylaws, how we should change those bylaws and amend them? He's consolidated the 8 pages to the first page. It's 1 page now. So that's something to read. Basically saying our next step is the trustees should review the proposed amendments attached and discuss any further changes at its March meeting. So you guys will have a whole month to look at these. Basically, in a nutshell, anything red was a technical change. Anything blue was substantive change where, it's probably going to be, people are going to want, just like you guys did tonight, they're going to want to talk this over. But if you guys feel that this is comfortable to move forward with, then what we want to do as a committee is, whoever's going to be on the committee, we want to get the stakeholders together to review this. So this is not a public document yet, but I brought it to this meeting, so I think it's now a public document.
Red is technical, blue is what?
Red is technical, blue is substantive, or substantive. Other than that, it's the original document. We're supposed to do this every 5 years. We've met like 4 or 5 times. We've had some public input. Erica Kidd was at one of the meetings. Brenda Benner made 2 of them. Jim Cross has been to the last 3 of 4. And he's in this little cover page. He's pretty comfortable with the way this is moving. But what ends up happening is if we, as a board, feel that we need to protect our lake even further because of what's going on,
This is
like
what
we
we're
can,
doing.
we can say in this, guess what, Turner, Minot, Hebron, Buckfield, you're going to have this ordinance. Because we're going to enact the ordinance, and we have the legislative authority to do that and protect our tributaries. So these are things that, you can mull over in the next month, and then they'll be on the agenda, hopefully. Other than that, if you have any specific questions, but again, I know I just gave this to you tonight. We weren't intending to do that. I know Jason couldn't be here. He's on vacation.
First of all, I appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting myself. I've learned a lot, and I've also learned to appreciate what we had even more by learning all this stuff. So it's been good therapy for me.
Did we go through, I'm just going to make sure we check.
Yep.
Did we do the lead and copper?
Yes.
Rule update?
Mike did that,
Next
right?
committee
Yeah.
report.
Equipment purchase, that was we've done that, right? And bonding for pipe replacement, we did that, we discussed that,
Report,
correct? Yeah. All right.
The only thing
I'm sorry,
that,
go ahead.
Yep, that was it for me. Unless there's any questions for next month, just shoot me an email or just get with Sid or Jim Cross. I would like to discuss, I don't know if it's suspend the rules, but I would like to discuss the letter that Sid forwarded this morning. Maybe authorized Andy and Sid to continue working with Lewiston. They want to negotiate. I don't know if you saw that. Do I have to suspend the rules to have it as an official agenda item?
Probably
or-
should, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll make a motion to suspend the rules to add under old business the Lewiston letter, email, regarding fair negotiations for watershed costs.
Yep.
We have
I
a
would
second.
that.
Okay. All in favor? Okay, no discussion.
Cool. Other than that, I'll give Sid the floor on that, and Andy. Just it's a real simple note, right?
Yep, well, as you remember, I wrote that letter to them there was a request to write a letter to the city of Lewiston asking if they'd consider.
Are you guys here for the meeting?
Yep.
Oh, that's
Next
next
door
door.
over.
Thank you.
Yep, if they would entertain continuing the meetings that we had. So I was hoping to get a letter back to put in the packet. It came this morning in the form of an email. Essentially said yes. However, they were hoping at least to wait until their budget process was over, given their time constraints. But bottom line is, I don't know if you all had a chance to see it, but
When's your budget process over?
Well, they start earlier than we do.
well, they're on a calendar. They're on a fiscal year instead of a calendar year, so they're right in the throes of it right now.
So they're basically we shouldn't hire our attorneys yet from Portland until we can meet with them again. But they want to delay that how long?
Well, they said till their budget process is over. I don't know what that means.
So
I think it's April.
Lewiston?
I mean, they'll be
Ours is
presenting to
done.
council by April, for sure. So they should be done formulating their budget by then, I would
It
say.
becomes official July 1, but I don't.
But another day, yeah, council talks about it, but they're done.
So that original team, Andy, if I make a motion, would you have any opposition to meeting this month with them just to get more information on how long we should be waiting for them to come to the table
I could ask them that.
as just staff?
I mean, that wouldn't be a bad thing to ask if they give us a time frame. But I think that we should ask for an April meeting myself. That gives them the time they need to formulate their budget. because,
So no
again,
motion
Heather
required?
is now is financial director because she doesn't have one right now. So I'm sure she's crazy putting budgets together. but by April, they're usually starting to vote, they usually vote fairly early. So they're ahead of Auburn by usually a month or a month and a half, so they have finance committee and all that. So I would think that-
I could simply reach out and ask them when they.
ask them if we can do it in April.
Yep.
Just to get more information, you know?
Yeah.
Not that we understand that budget process, but
See if we can fit some time in.
it's just an extra copy of the bylaws. There you go.
And I think that the priority on that was to find out what their belief was on the audit stuff, because they had talked about the audit thing, and I bet they
Yeah.
installed on that.
Yeah.
We're ready to go, as long as they're willing to tell us we want to do it. Have the auditing company who just finished, right? should
Well,
be
they're currently doing
in the
our audit
process.
now.
That was
and theirs
perfect
as
time
well.
maybe to have them pluck out things while they're doing their audit
Yeah, true.
so they can feel comfortable about the items that we were discussing.
Yep.
And if they can do that, then that's what we want to do by April, is have an update on that so we can move forward talking about bullet points.
Yep. That.
I mean, somehow the board has to, in the city, has to communicate with Lewiston that if something's absolutely necessary to prevent our lake from getting any more polluted, to maintain our waiver filtration, that should be identified as the cost of providing water to the ratepayers. And then that should be apportioned by use, 60%, 40%. So we could be looking at increased water rates because we're restricting development in the watershed as a city. You know, so I mean, this is something that I'm adamant about. I mean, and I hope you guys realize that somebody has to pay for this. And why is the city of Lewiston taxpayers, and you've went through that tree already, city of Auburn taxpayers should not have to burden the cost of subsidize the cost of delivering water.
Well, we haven't had that we've had that discussion briefly, but we haven't got into the nuts and bolts. That's part of it.
That's right. Because there's Auburn taxpayers that are not water and sewer customers that are subsidizing the Lewiston ratepayers by paying higher taxes than they would if we were using that land, if there was if that lake wasn't the water supply for Lewiston. That land would be producing tax revenue to the city. So, all right.
Just a clarification on the next meeting date. The 16th is after the second Tuesday.
The 1st is a Tuesday. March 1st is a Tuesday.
Oh, you know what?
You're looking at last year's
Yeah, no,
calendar, aren't you?
no, I'm just looking at something from United. I know you have number 1 here as a date. Mike? Okay, good.
All good.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Okay. Last thing is motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? All right, we are adjourned.